poison is not always something sudden, dramatic, or loud. In nature and within the human body, the boundary between what harms and what heals is often defined by quiet details, by dose, balance, and timing. The same substance that supports life at one level can gently disrupt it at another, not through force, but through subtle shifts that often go unnoticed. This is not a story about danger. It is a story about systems. It is about how the body recognizes what does not belong without fear and without urgency. About how chemistry and biology communicate constantly beneath awareness, adjusting, compensating, restoring balance long before the mind becomes involved. Every moment, countless processes unfold silently. Signals are exchanged, thresholds are monitored, responses are measured with precision so refined that it feels almost effortless. What we call poison is often simply a question of proportion, not an enemy, but a reminder of how finely tuned life truly is. As you listen, there is nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to protect yourself from. The body already knows how to respond, how to adapt, and how to return to equilibrium without conscious instruction. This journey is not meant to alert the mind. It is meant to soften it. Here, poison becomes a lens, a way to observe how order is maintained through calm mechanisms, how the nervous system responds to subtle signals without panic, and how stability quietly re-emerges once balance is restored. As understanding replaces concern, the need for vigilance begins to fade. Attention can loosen its grip. Thoughts no longer need to follow each detail. Allow awareness to settle into a slower rhythm. The details will continue to unfold quietly on their own, and the mind can rest, knowing that these systems have always worked in silence. What we call poison is rarely defined by the identity of a substance itself. In science, poison is not a label attached to a molecule, but a description of a relationship shaped by dose, exposure, and time. A substance becomes harmful not because it suddenly changes its nature, but because the balance between the body and that substance quietly shifts. What matters is not what something is, but how the body encounters it. Many elements essential to life exist on this same continuum. Water sustains every biological system, yet overwhelms them when regulation fails. Oxygen supports cellular respiration, yet damages tissue when concentrations rise beyond tolerance. Even minerals and vitamins, often associated with health, follow this rule. The boundary between support and disruption is not dramatic or obvious. It is subtle, gradual, and governed by thresholds that the body constantly monitors. The body does not interpret poison as danger in the way the mind imagines it. Instead, it reads chemical changes as information. Sensors distributed throughout tissues quietly compare what is present to what is expected. When concentrations begin to drift, responses emerge automatically. Enzymes adjust their pace, metabolic pathways redirect, and protective mechanisms activate without any sense of urgency. These changes occur long before discomfort, long before awareness, and often without leaving any trace in memory. This process unfolds continuously, even in moments of complete stillness. Filtration, regulation, and signaling never pause. The liver processes compounds methodically. The kidneys refine balance with precision. Neural and hormonal systems exchange messages that maintain stability across the entire organism. None of these systems require instruction, attention, or effort. They respond proportionally, conserving energy while preserving order. From this perspective, poison reveals something quietly remarkable. It exposes how finely tuned life truly is. It shows that survival is not maintained through force, but through sensitivity, through the ability to detect the smallest deviation and respond with restraint. What appears harmful at one level becomes manageable at another, not through resistance, but through regulation. As these systems continue their work beneath awareness, there is nothing the mind needs to solve. There is no threat to anticipate, no outcome to control. The body has navigated these relationships for as long as life has existed, maintaining balance through calm, continuous adjustment. Awareness can soften, knowing that stability is not fragile. It is sustained quietly, moment by moment, without effort. The distinction between medicine and poison is not written into the substance itself. It is written into context, into how much is taken, how often it appears, and how the body receives it. In pharmacology, this principle is foundational. The same compound can heal or harm depending entirely on dosage and timing. There is no sudden transformation, no shift in identity, only a gradual change in relationship. Throughout history, many of the most effective medicines originated from substances once considered dangerous. Compounds extracted from plants, minerals, and even toxins have long been used to influence biological systems in precise ways. When administered carefully, these substances interact with the body's chemistry to restore balance, reduce stress on certain pathways, or support recovery. When misaligned with the body's capacity to regulate them, those same interactions become disruptive. The body responds to medicine and poison using the same language. There is no separate system for healing and harm. Receptors bind, signals propagate, enzymes process what arrives. What changes is not the mechanism, but the scale. At lower concentrations, systems adapt smoothly. At higher levels, the same systems work harder, redirecting resources, slowing processes, or isolating compounds to preserve stability. This is why the boundary between benefit and disruption feels so quiet. There is rarely a clear moment where something becomes harmful. Instead, thresholds are crossed gradually. The body compensates first. It adjusts. Only when capacity is exceeded does imbalance become noticeable. Long before that point, regulation is already underway, operating without urgency and without awareness. In this way, medicine does not override the body, it cooperates with it. Effective treatment works not by forcing change, but by aligning with existing regulatory systems. It supports processes that are already in motion, guiding them gently rather than commanding them. Poison, by contrast, reveals what happens when that cooperation slips out of proportion, not through drama, but through quiet overload. As this distinction softens, the idea of poison loses its sharp edges. It becomes less about threat and more about understanding limits. The body is not fragile, but it is precise. It thrives within ranges, responds within margins, and restores balance through continuous adjustment. Recognizing this allows the mind to release tension. There is no need to monitor every detail. The same systems that manage healing also manage disruption. With equal calm, the body does not wait for danger to announce itself. It does not rely on sudden alarms or dramatic signals to recognize what may cause harm. Instead, it observes continuously, quietly comparing what is present to what is expected. This process happens beneath awareness, guided by sensitivity rather than urgency. Across tissues and organs, Specialized receptors act as constant listeners. They detect chemical patterns, concentrations, and changes in balance, translating them into information rather than emotion. Nothing here is interpreted as good or bad. Substances are not judged, they are measured. Their presence is noted, their intensity assessed, and their behavior observed over time. When something unfamiliar appears, the response is not immediate rejection. The body first seeks context. It asks whether this substance fits within known ranges, whether it can be processed, redirected, or neutralized without disruption. Enzymatic pathways adjust their pace. Transport mechanisms shift direction. Protective systems prepare quietly, without drawing attention to themselves. This detection does not happen in isolation. The nervous system, immune system, and metabolic systems communicate continuously, sharing subtle signals that refine the response. Hormones modulate activity. Neural pathways adjust sensitivity. Together, these systems create a layered awareness that allows the body to respond proportionally rather than reactively. Most of the time, this process completes without leaving any trace. Substances are filtered, transformed, or eliminated smoothly. Balance is restored before discomfort arises. The mind remains unaware because there is no need for involvement. The absence of sensation is not a failure to detect harm. It is evidence that detection worked quietly and effectively. In this way, safety is maintained not through vigilance, but through refinement. The body does not brace itself against the world, it adapts to it. Harmful potential is recognized early, managed gently, and resolved through calm regulation. As these systems continue their work beneath awareness, there is nothing for the mind to monitor. Stability is already in motion, sustained by processes that have always known how to respond. In the living world, poison is rarely an exception. It is a pattern. Across ecosystems, countless organisms produce substances that influence, regulate, or deter other forms of life. These substances do not exist to cause harm in isolation. They exist as part of a larger balance, a quiet dialogue between survival, adaptation, and coexistence. In this context, poison is not an act of aggression, but a form of communication shaped by evolution. Plants, for example, do not flee from threat. They remain rooted, exposed to their environment, responding through chemistry rather than movement. Over time, they have developed compounds that discourage overconsumption, slow digestion, or alter the behavior of organisms that interact with them. These substances are not designed to overwhelm. They function subtly, often requiring repeated exposure or specific conditions to have any noticeable effect. Their presence is measured, integrated into the environment as a gentle boundary rather than a forceful barrier. In animals, natural toxins follow a similar logic. Venoms, secretions, and defensive chemicals are rarely deployed indiscriminately. They are metabolically expensive to produce and are therefore regulated carefully. Many are stored in inactive forms, activated only when necessary. This restraint reflects an underlying principle found throughout biology. Efficiency favors balance over excess. What appears dangerous at the surface is, in practice, tightly controlled and context-dependent. Microorganisms add another layer to this quiet complexity. Bacteria and fungi produce chemical compounds that inhibit competitors, regulate population density, or shape their immediate surroundings. These substances rarely act alone. They interact with countless other signals, forming chemical landscapes that guide growth and restraint simultaneously. In these systems, poison is not a weapon, but a tuning mechanism, a way to maintain proportion within crowded, interconnected environments. What becomes clear through these patterns is that poison does not stand apart from life. It is woven into it. It emerges wherever organisms share space, resources, and time. Rather than disrupting order, these substances often preserve it, preventing any single element from expanding beyond balance. Life does not eliminate threat entirely. It integrates it, softens it, and distributes it across systems that can absorb and regulate its effects. Seen through this lens, the idea of poison loses its sharpness. It becomes less about danger and more about relationship. These substances do not seek destruction. They reflect the boundaries within which life remains sustainable. As these interactions unfold quietly across the natural world, there is no urgency, no escalation, only continuous adjustment shaped by systems that have learned, over long periods of time, how to remain stable without excess. In science, dose is not simply a number. It is a relationship measured over time, shaped by frequency, intensity, and the body's capacity to respond. A substance does not act alone when it enters the body. It arrives into a living system already in motion, a system that evaluates, distributes, transforms, and releases what it encounters. The effect that follows is not immediate or absolute, but gradual, unfolding as balance is either maintained or gently displaced. Every biological system operates within ranges. Temperature, pressure, chemical concentration, and electrical signaling all exist within boundaries that allow function to remain stable. When a substance enters this landscape, it does not instantly disrupt it. The body first absorbs the change, buffering its presence through circulation, metabolism, and storage. Only when these buffers approach their limits does strain begin to appear, and even then, adjustment precedes disruption. This is why dose matters more than identity. A small amount of a compound may pass through unnoticed, integrated seamlessly into existing processes. A larger amount may slow pathways, redirect energy, or require additional effort from organs responsible for regulation. None of this occurs abruptly. The body negotiates each step, allocating resources proportionally, favoring stability over reaction. Balance is preserved not through resistance, but through continuous recalibration. Time plays a quiet but decisive role in this process. A single exposure is rarely equivalent to repeated exposure. Spacing allows recovery. Intervals allow systems to reset. When substances arrive slowly, the body adapts without stress, adjusting thresholds and responses in subtle ways. When they arrive too quickly or too often, capacity is tested not by the substance itself, but by the pace at which balance must be restored. In this way, imbalance is not a failure. It is a signal that the rhythm between input and regulation has shifted. The body responds by slowing absorption, increasing elimination, or temporarily altering sensitivity. These changes are not alarms. They are corrections, quiet recalculations, designed to bring systems back toward equilibrium without urgency or force. Understanding dose as balance allows the mind to soften its assumptions. There is no sharp boundary where safety suddenly ends. There are gradients, margins, and zones of adaptation. The body moves through these spaces constantly, maintaining order through gentle adjustments that rarely reach awareness. As these processes continue, There is no need for vigilance. Balance is not fragile. It is dynamic, sustained through calm, continuous negotiation between what enters and what the body already knows how to manage. The nervous system does not experience threat as fear. Fear belongs to awareness. The nervous system responds long before emotion takes shape, operating through patterns refined over time. When a potential disruption appears, the response is not dramatic or immediate. It is measured, layered, and guided by a priority that remains constant, preserving balance while conserving energy. At the earliest level, sensory and chemical signals are filtered quietly. Information moves through neural pathways that assess intensity, duration, and relevance. Most signals never rise beyond this stage. They are processed, compared, and resolved without leaving any trace in awareness. This filtering is not passive, it is active refinement, allowing the nervous system to remain responsive without becoming reactive. When a signal exceeds familiar thresholds, the response still unfolds gradually. Rather than triggering alarm, the nervous system adjusts tone. Heart rate may shift slightly, breathing patterns subtly change. Attention narrows or softens depending on context. These changes are not commands. They are suggestions, gentle recalibrations that prepare the body to adapt without urgency or force. Communication within the nervous system is continuous and distributed. The brain does not act alone. Signals travel through networks that connect organs, muscles, and internal systems, coordinating responses that remain proportional to the situation. Hormonal pathways support this process, extending the response over time while maintaining restraint. Together, these systems create a state of readiness that feels calm rather than tense. Importantly, the nervous system is designed to return to baseline. Once a signal fades, adjustments reverse themselves. Muscles release. Breath deepens. Circulation settles into familiar rhythms. This return is not an achievement. It is the default state. Stability is restored not through effort, but through letting go of what is no longer required. As this cycle repeats, the body learns trust in its own regulation. Threat does not linger. Vigilance is not maintained unnecessarily. The nervous system recognizes when a response is complete and releases it without instruction. In this way, safety is preserved not through constant alertness, but through flexibility, the ability to respond, adjust, and then rest. With this understanding, there is nothing for the mind to manage. The nervous system already knows how to respond to change and how to return to calm. Awareness can loosen its focus, allowing these processes to continue quietly in the background. Balance does not depend on attention. It is sustained through systems that have always known how to settle back into stillness. Detoxification is rarely something the body begins. It is something the body continues. From the earliest moments of life, regulation and removal have been inseparable from function itself. The body does not wait for imbalance to appear before it responds. It does not shift suddenly into a corrective mode. Detoxification unfolds continuously, woven into ordinary biological activity so seamlessly that it remains unnoticed, unremarked, and uninterrupted. Rather than acting as a defense, detoxification operates as refinement. Substances that enter the body are not immediately categorized as harmful or beneficial. They are encountered gradually, assessed through interaction, and shaped through transformation. The liver alters chemical structures step by step, not to eliminate them abruptly, but to make them compatible with safe circulation and release. The kidneys adjust concentration with precision, filtering without urgency, maintaining consistency rather than reacting to change. Digestion regulates timing, ensuring that exposure remains within ranges the body can absorb calmly. This process is deliberate without being forceful. Detoxification does not attempt to clear everything unfamiliar. It recognizes that variation is unavoidable and that balance depends on accommodation rather than exclusion. Storage, conversion, and gradual release allow substances to move through the body without overwhelming any single system. The emphasis is not speed, but continuity, preserving function while change is absorbed. Time plays a central role in this quiet work. The body allows detoxification to proceed at a pace that supports stability. Enzymatic reactions unfold sequentially, each step preparing the conditions for the next. When processing capacity is sufficient, transformation occurs smoothly. When capacity is approached, the body slows absorption, redistributes workload, and extends timelines rather than escalating effort. Nothing here resembles urgency. Adjustment replaces reaction. Even under sustained exposure, detoxification remains measured. Rather than intensifying indiscriminately, regulatory systems coordinate, circulation adapts. Metabolic priorities shift subtly. Energy is conserved where possible, redirected where necessary. These changes do not signal failure. They reflect resilience, the ability to maintain order through flexibility rather than resistance. The nervous system supports this process indirectly, not through command, but through context. States of calm allow detoxification to proceed efficiently. When the body is at rest, blood flow becomes even, digestion stabilizes, and hormonal signals favor maintenance over defense. In these conditions, detoxification does not accelerate. It becomes smoother, requiring less effort to achieve the same outcome. Regulation thrives in quiet environments. Importantly, detoxification does not depend on awareness. There is no instruction required, no technique to initiate, no vigilance to maintain. The body does not wait for permission to restore balance. It responds through feedback loops refined across time, adjusting continuously without conscious involvement. Awareness can withdraw entirely without disrupting the process. Detoxification continues uninterrupted. This understanding reframes the idea of cleansing or correction. There is nothing to reset, nothing to purge, nothing to force. The body does not accumulate imbalance as a mistake. It absorbs variation as a condition of living. Detoxification exists not to erase change, but to integrate it gently, preserving continuity through adaptation rather than elimination. As these processes unfold beneath awareness, tension becomes unnecessary. There is no need to track inputs or anticipate outcomes. Regulation is already underway, sustained by systems that operate reliably without supervision. Balance is not fragile. It is dynamic, maintained through calm negotiation between what enters and what the body already knows how to manage. In this quiet constancy, detoxification reveals its true nature, not an event, not a reaction, but a background rhythm steady, patient, and precise, allowing life to continue without interruption. Awareness can soften, knowing that stability is not something to achieve. It is something the body has been sustaining all along, quietly, without effort. Balance is not something the body searches for. It is something the body remembers. After every adjustment, every response, every moment of change, there is an underlying tendency to return to a familiar state. This return does not happen through effort or correction. It happens through release. Systems gradually let go of what is no longer needed, allowing rhythms to settle back into patterns that feel stable and efficient. Once a challenge has passed, the body does not remain engaged with it. Signals that were briefly elevated begin to soften. Pathways that were active slow their pace. Energy that was redirected returns to maintenance rather than response. This shift is not sudden. It unfolds gently, guided by feedback loops that sense when effort is no longer required. Balance re-emerges not because it is enforced, but because it is the most economical state to occupy. The nervous system plays a central role in this return. After responding to change, it gradually reduces tone, allowing muscles to release and breath to deepen. Circulation redistributes evenly, attention widens rather than narrows. These changes are not instructions. They are permissions, subtle signals that the body is safe to rest, safe to conserve energy, safe to resume its baseline rhythms. At the cellular level, restoration continues quietly. Chemical gradients normalize. Metabolic activity stabilizes. Repair processes proceed without urgency, replacing what was used, restoring what was altered. None of this requires awareness. The body does not announce that balance is returning. It simply allows systems to complete their cycles, closing loops that were briefly opened. What is often interpreted as calm is, in reality, efficiency. When balance is restored, the body expends less energy monitoring, adjusting, or compensating. Processes align naturally, reducing friction across systems. This state is not empty or inactive. It is organized, coordinated, and quietly productive. Rest emerges as a consequence of this organization, not as a separate goal. Importantly, balance is not identical each time it returns. The body adapts through experience, refining its thresholds and responses. Each cycle of disruption and restoration leaves behind subtle adjustments that make future regulations smoother. Balance is therefore not static. It is flexible, shaped by repetition, strengthened through gentle variation rather than force. As this process completes, awareness becomes unnecessary. There is nothing left to track, nothing to resolve. The body has already transitioned out of response and back into continuity. Attention can loosen, thoughts can drift, and the sense of effort fades. Balance does not require confirmation. It is present in the quiet absence of demand. In this state, rest does not need to be created. It appears naturally when systems are no longer occupied with adjustment. The body settles into itself, guided by rhythms that have always known how to return. Nothing is held, nothing is pushed away. Balance simply resumes its place, steady and unobtrusive, allowing awareness to fade without resistance. Rest is not the absence of activity. It is the presence of coordination. When the body enters a state of rest, countless processes continue, but they do so without conflict or urgency. Energy is no longer divided between competing demands. Systems align around maintenance rather than response, allowing the body to function with minimal internal resistance. In this state, the nervous system gradually reduces its signaling. Patterns that once supported alertness soften, and pathways associated with vigilance release their hold. Breathing becomes slower and more regular, not by intention, but because there is no longer a need for speed. Heart rhythm settles into familiar intervals. Muscles relinquish tension that was never consciously held. responding to signals that quietly indicate safety. Rest allows biological processes to complete what they have already begun. Repair does not start during rest, it continues. Regulation does not activate, it smooths out. The body uses this state to refine chemical balance, restore gradients, and redistribute resources with efficiency. These adjustments are subtle, occurring beneath perception, guided by internal timing rather than external cues. As rest deepens, the distinction between effort and ease becomes less defined. The body no longer needs to manage competing priorities. Metabolic activity stabilizes, hormonal signals favor restoration over stimulation. Circulation remains even, supporting tissues without excess. In this environment, processes unfold sequentially rather than simultaneously, reducing friction across systems. Importantly, rest does not require stillness of thought. The mind may wander, images may arise, sensations may drift through awareness. None of this interferes with rest. The body does not demand silence or focus. It responds to rhythm, consistency, and the absence of urgency. Rest is supported not by control, but by permission. Over time, this state reinforces itself. As systems experience uninterrupted regulation, thresholds adjust. Future responses become more efficient. The body learns that it can return to rest without resistance, that stability does not depend on constant monitoring. This learning is not conscious. It is embedded within patterns that shape how the body responds to change. When rest is established, effort becomes unnecessary. There is nothing to hold together, nothing to resolve. Processes continue because they are designed to do so, not because attention sustains them. Awareness can drift freely, unburdened by responsibility, as the body settles into rhythms that require no supervision. In this way, rest is not something achieved, it is something allowed. When interference fades, when urgency dissolves, the body naturally occupies this state. Regulation continues quietly, balance remains intact, and awareness is free to soften, knowing that nothing needs to be managed. When the body begins to settle, it does not do so all at once, and it does not move towards stillness as a goal. Settling is a gradual redistribution of effort, a quiet unwinding of systems that were once coordinated toward response and are now free to return to maintenance. Signals that were briefly amplified begin to soften without instruction, and pathways that were active slowly reduce their pace, not because they are forced to stop, but because there is no longer a reason to continue. This process unfolds evenly, without a central command, guided by countless feedback loops that sense when balance has been restored enough to release further effort. As this settling deepens, the body shifts its priorities without drawing attention to the change. Energy that was once directed toward monitoring and adjustment becomes available for refinement and restoration. Circulation evens out, no longer favoring readiness over distribution. Breathing settles into a rhythm that requires less effort to maintain, and muscular tone releases in layers, not as a single event, but as a sequence of small permissions given over time. None of this depends on awareness. The body does not wait to be noticed before it relaxes its grip. Within the nervous system, communication continues, but it changes character. Signals become slower, broader, less urgent. The sharp edges of response fade into softer patterns that support continuity rather than action. This is not a shutdown, and it is not withdrawal. It is a reorganization that favors efficiency, allowing systems to remain responsive while no longer holding tension. The body does not brace itself against what might come next. It trusts that it can respond again if needed, and that trust allows it to rest. At deeper levels, cellular processes follow the same principle. Chemical gradients normalize gradually. Metabolic pathways return to familiar ranges. Repair mechanisms proceed without acceleration, replacing what was used, restoring what was altered, and reinforcing structures that support long-term stability. These processes are not dramatic, and they do not require ideal conditions. They unfold reliably whenever interference is reduced, guided by internal timing rather than external demand. As this quiet coordination continues, the sense of effort dissolves almost completely. There is no longer a need to hold the body together through attention or intention. Systems align because alignment is the most economical state to occupy. The absence of urgency allows processes to complete themselves, closing loops that were briefly opened and leaving behind a state that feels calm, not because something has been achieved, but because nothing remains unfinished. In this settled state, awareness is free to drift without consequence. Thoughts may slow or wander, sensations may fade or blend, and time may lose its usual structure. None of this interrupts what the body is doing. Regulation continues quietly, balance remains intact, and the need for supervision disappears. The system has returned to a state it recognizes, one it has visited countless times before, where stability is maintained through ease rather than effort, and rest emerges naturally as the body resumes its uninterrupted rhythm. As the body settles further into rest, the most noticeable change is not what happens, but what no longer needs to happen. Effort quietly withdraws from places where it was once distributed, and systems that had been coordinating toward response release their alignment without resistance. There is no final signal, no clear moment of transition. Instead, rest arrives as a soft continuation of what was already underway, shaped by the gradual absence of demand rather than the presence of instruction. The body does not seek rest as an outcome. It simply occupies it when nothing requires adjustment. In this state, regulation becomes almost invisible. Processes continue, but they do so without drawing resources toward urgency or control. Breathing maintains itself without pattern or correction. Muscles hold only the tone required to remain supported, releasing everything else without effort. Circulation flows evenly, unconcerned with prioritization, sustaining tissues quietly and consistently. The body does not pause activity. It refines it, allowing each system to operate at the lowest effective level needed to preserve balance. The nervous system reflects this shift through simplicity rather than silence. Communication remains constant, but signals lose their sharpness, spreading gently across networks without compelling attention. Sensory input no longer demands interpretation. Internal signals no longer compete for priority. The nervous system remains present without being alert, responsive without being tense, maintaining a state where readiness exists without pressure. This balance allows the body to remain safe while no longer holding itself in preparation. At deeper levels, restoration continues as a background rhythm. Cellular maintenance proceeds steadily, repairing structures, recalibrating gradients, and reinforcing stability in ways that do not depend on timing or awareness. These processes are not accelerated by rest, nor are they delayed by distraction. They unfold according to internal sequences that require only one condition to function efficiently: the absence of interference. Rest provides that condition naturally, without design or effort. As the body remains in this state, the distinction between doing and allowing becomes less meaningful. Nothing is being actively maintained, yet nothing is neglected. Systems remain aligned because alignment requires less energy than resistance. This economy is what makes rest sustainable. It is not fragile, and it does not require protection. Once established, it supports itself through consistency rather than control. In this quiet continuity, awareness is no longer needed as a guide. Attention can drift, dissolve, or fade without affecting what the body is doing. Regulation remains intact. Balance holds steady. The body rests, not because it has been instructed to do so, but because there is nothing left to manage. Rest becomes the natural state that emerges when effort steps aside, allowing systems to continue exactly as they were designed to, quietly and without interruption. As the body remains in a state of rest, a subtle shift begins to take place in awareness itself. This shift is not something that needs to be guided or observed, because it happens naturally when attention is no longer required to manage internal states. Awareness gradually loosens its involvement, not by disappearing, but by stepping back from constant interpretation. Thoughts may still arise, sensations may still pass through, but they do so without pulling the mind into response. The body does not depend on awareness to regulate itself, and when this becomes clear, interference gently fades. In everyday life, awareness often feels responsible for maintaining balance, as if attention were needed to hold systems together. In rest, this assumption dissolves. Regulation continues uninterrupted, even as focus softens. The mind does not need to track breathing for breathing to continue, nor does it need to monitor sensations for stability to remain intact. This realization does not arrive as insight or conclusion. It arrives as ease, as the absence of effort where effort once seemed necessary. As awareness withdraws from control, it begins to occupy a different role. Instead of directing, it witnesses without attachment. Instead of organizing, it allows. This change is not dramatic. It unfolds quietly, often unnoticed, as attention becomes less centered on specific points and more diffuse. Boundaries between sensations blur slightly. Time loses its sharp structure. The body continues its rhythms, unconcerned with whether they are being observed. At this stage, the nervous system benefits from the absence of mental tension. Signals no longer compete with interpretation. Sensory input is received without urgency, processed without escalation, and released without residue. The body recognizes that it is not being evaluated, and in response, it maintains its calm regulation with greater efficiency. Awareness, no longer interfering, becomes a neutral presence rather than an active participant. This non-interference allows deeper processes to unfold without friction. Subtle adjustments that might have been delayed by attention now complete themselves smoothly. Muscular tone releases further. Breathing settles into an effortless rhythm. Internal timing synchronizes across systems, not because it is directed to do so, but because nothing interrupts it. The body functions best when it is not being supervised. As awareness continues to soften, there is no need to follow where it goes. It may drift, hover, or fade altogether, and none of these states disrupt what the body is doing. Regulation remains stable. Balance persists. Rest deepens, not as a result of intention, but as a consequence of permission. When awareness no longer interferes, the body resumes its natural equilibrium, sustained quietly by systems that have never required conscious involvement to function. As awareness continues to loosen its hold, thought itself begins to change character. It does not stop, and it does not need to be silenced. Instead, it becomes less directed, less insistent on purpose or conclusion. Thoughts arise without demanding completion, forming gentle fragments rather than structured sequences. The mind no longer feels the need to follow each one to its end. In this state, thinking loses its role as a tool for navigation and becomes a background movement, present but no longer central. This shift does not feel like losing control. It feels like releasing responsibility. The mind recognizes, without analysis, that nothing requires immediate organization. Ideas may surface and dissolve before taking shape. Images may appear briefly, unconnected to memory or plan. There is no effort to hold them together, and no concern when they fade. The absence of direction allows thought to move freely, without resistance, without the pressure to make sense. As directed thought recedes, attention spreads rather than focuses. Instead of narrowing around a single point, awareness becomes wide and diffuse, holding experience gently without emphasis. Sensations blend into one another, sounds lose their edges, internal signals pass through without being labeled or measured. This diffusion reduces friction across mental activity, allowing the nervous system to remain calm while consciousness stays lightly present. In this state, time begins to soften. Moments no longer stack in clear succession. There is less distinction between what has just occurred and what might come next. The mind does not track duration or sequence because there is no task requiring it to do so. Time becomes a background condition rather than a structure to move through. This change is subtle, often noticed only as a sense of ease or suspension. The body responds favorably to this absence of directed thought. Without mental pressure to anticipate or evaluate, physiological systems remain steady. Breathing continues without pattern. Muscles maintain only what is necessary for support. Internal rhythms synchronize naturally, guided by signals that do not need interpretation. The body functions without interruption because the mind is no longer attempting to guide it. As this drifting continues, awareness no longer needs to decide where to rest. It may hover, fade, or pass gently between impressions, and none of these movements disturb the underlying calm. Regulation remains intact, balance holds without reinforcement. The mind does not fall away. It simply stops insisting on direction. In this openness, rest deepens naturally, supported by the quiet cooperation between body and awareness, where neither needs to lead and neither needs to follow. As directed thought continues to loosen, effort itself begins to dissolve in a way that is difficult to mark but easy to feel. There is no clear moment when effort stops. It simply becomes unnecessary. The body no longer senses a need to maintain readiness, and the mind no longer searches for something to do with its attention. What remains is a gentle continuity, a state in which processes unfold without being pushed forward or held back. This absence of effort does not create emptiness. It creates space, allowing everything that is already in motion to proceed without friction. In this state, the body functions with a remarkable simplicity. Signals move where they need to move, responses complete themselves, and systems maintain their balance without drawing resources toward correction. Muscles rest into their natural alignment, holding only what is required for support. Breathing continues without rhythm or control, adjusting itself moment by moment without instruction. The heart follows patterns that feel familiar and unremarkable, sustaining circulation quietly without emphasis or demand. The nervous system reflects this ease through consistency rather than silence. Communication remains steady, but without urgency or intensity. There is no scanning for threat, no preparation for response. Sensory input is received and released without interruption. Internal signals do not compete for attention. This calm coordination allows the body to remain responsive while resting deeply, a balance that does not require vigilance to maintain. As effort fades, awareness becomes less defined by position or focus. It no longer feels centered behind the eyes or anchored to a particular sensation. Instead, it exists as a soft presence, unlocated and unburdened. Thoughts may appear briefly, but they do not gather momentum. Sensations may pass through, but they do not demand interpretation. Experience flows without resistance, guided by its own rhythm rather than by intention. This absence of effort allows deeper restoration to continue uninterrupted. Cellular processes refine themselves quietly, completing cycles that were already underway. Chemical balance stabilizes further. Internal timing synchronizes across systems, not because it is directed to do so, but because nothing interferes. The body does not strive toward rest. It settles into it as the most efficient state to occupy when no adjustment is required. In this quiet condition, there is nothing to manage and nothing to release. Effort has already stepped aside. What remains is a stable continuity, sustained without attention, without correction, without urgency. Awareness can drift freely or fade altogether, and the body continues exactly as it needs to. Rest deepens not through action, but through the gentle absence of interference, allowing balance to hold itself steady, moment after moment, without effort. As the state of rest continues, stillness does not arrive as a sudden absence of movement or sensation. It emerges gradually, as activity becomes so efficient and so evenly distributed that it no longer stands out. The body does not stop functioning, it simply stops announcing itself. Processes that once required coordination now unfold without friction, and the sense of internal motion fades into the background. Stillness is not something imposed on the body, it is what remains when nothing needs to be adjusted. In this condition, the body feels complete rather than inactive. There is no sense of waiting for something else to happen, no anticipation of change. Breathing continues in a way that feels distant and automatic, as if it belongs to the space around the body rather than to the body itself. Muscular tone is present only where structure is needed, releasing everywhere else without effort. Circulation moves steadily, unconcerned with speed or emphasis, supporting tissues in a way that requires no awareness. The nervous system settles into a pattern that favors continuity above all else. Signals travel slowly and broadly, maintaining coordination without urgency. There is no readiness held in reserve, no preparation for response. Sensory information arrives softened, stripped of sharp edges, processed without interpretation, and released without residue. The body recognizes that it does not need to remain alert in order to remain safe, and this recognition allows stillness to deepen naturally. As this quiet persists, awareness itself becomes increasingly diffuse. There is no clear boundary between attention and absence, between noticing and drifting. Thoughts, if they appear at all, feel distant and incomplete, lacking the structure to hold attention. Sensations blend into one another, losing definition. Time no longer feels segmented or directional. It becomes a gentle, continuous field in which nothing stands apart. This depth of stillness supports restoration without effort. Internal systems continue their work with minimal variation, completing processes that require consistency rather than speed. Repair, regulation, and balance proceed quietly, guided by internal timing that does not depend on external cues. The body remains organized not because it is held together, but because nothing pulls it apart. In this settled state, there is nothing left to release and nothing left to maintain. Stillness holds itself. The body remains at rest without needing to stay there. Awareness can fade or remain without consequence. Balance persists quietly, sustained by systems that have always known how to function without direction. Rest becomes complete, not because activity has ended, but because effort has fully withdrawn, allowing stillness to remain uninterrupted. Rest is not something the body reaches after effort has ended. It is the state the body naturally returns to when effort is no longer required. Beneath every response, beneath every adjustment and moment of activation, there exists a constant tendency toward equilibrium, a quiet orientation toward balance that does not need to be learned or reinforced. When external demands soften and internal signals no longer call for change, the body does not hesitate or search for direction. It settles automatically, guided by rhythms that have always been present, allowing systems to align without resistance and without the need for conscious involvement. In this state, activity does not disappear, but it becomes evenly distributed, no longer concentrated around urgency or control. Biological processes continue at a pace that feels effortless, supported by internal timing rather than external pressure. Circulation flows smoothly, maintaining consistency rather than speed. Breathing unfolds without pattern or correction, adapting moment by moment without drawing attention to itself. Muscles maintain only the tone required for structure, releasing everything else gradually, layer by layer, as the body recognizes that there is nothing left to hold. The nervous system reflects this return through quiet coordination rather than silence. Signals remain present, but they lose the intensity that once prepared the body for action. Communication becomes broad and diffuse, supporting continuity instead of response. Sensory information passes through gently, without being prioritized or interpreted, and internal signals no longer compete for awareness. The body remains responsive without being alert, organized without being tense, sustained by patterns that favor conservation over expenditure. As rest deepens, the sense of effort becomes increasingly difficult to locate. There is no clear boundary between doing and not doing, between holding and releasing. Processes complete themselves without instruction, guided by feedback loops that require only the absence of interference to function efficiently. Repair and regulation continue quietly, not as tasks to be accomplished, but as natural expressions of stability. The body does not strive toward rest. It occupies it when nothing pulls it away. Awareness, in turn, becomes lighter and less defined. It no longer feels responsible for maintaining balance or monitoring internal states. Attention may drift, hover, or fade entirely, and none of these movements disrupt what the body is doing. Thoughts may appear briefly, unconnected and incomplete, dissolving before they gather momentum. Sensations soften, blending into a continuous field rather than standing apart as separate events. Time loses its structure, becoming a gentle backdrop rather than a sequence to move through. In this condition, rest is no longer experienced as an outcome or reward. It is simply the absence of disruption, the state that remains when regulation is complete and nothing requires adjustment. The body rests because it is free to do so, supported by systems that have always known how to return to balance without guidance. Stillness holds without effort, continuity persists without attention, and awareness is free to soften completely, knowing that stability is not something to maintain, but something already present. As rest continues to deepen, the body no longer requires awareness as a companion to its processes. Regulation proceeds without supervision, guided by internal timing that does not depend on attention or intention. Systems remain coordinated, not because they are observed, but because coordination is their natural condition when interference has faded. The body does not ask to be watched in order to function. It continues steadily, sustained by patterns refined through repetition rather than control. In this state, continuity becomes more noticeable than change. Instead of tracking shifts or transitions, the body maintains a stable internal environment where variation is absorbed without disruption. Breathing continues in gentle cycles that feel distant and automatic. Circulation supports tissues evenly, without emphasis or urgency. Muscular tone remains balanced, holding structure where needed and releasing everywhere else without instruction. These processes do not call attention to themselves because they do not require decision or adjustment. The nervous system reflects this continuity through an absence of contrast. Signals are neither heightened nor suppressed. They are simply present, flowing at a level that supports maintenance rather than response. Sensory input arrives softened, processed without interpretation, and released without residue. Internal communication remains consistent, allowing systems to remain aligned without effort. The body stays responsive without holding readiness, maintaining safety through stability rather than vigilance. As awareness withdraws further, it becomes less defined as a position or function. It no longer anchors itself to thoughts, sensations, or time. Instead, it exists as a diffuse presence that does not interfere with what unfolds. Thoughts may appear as fragments, incomplete and unbound, dissolving before they take shape. Sensations merge into a single, continuous field. The distinction between noticing and drifting becomes less clear, and neither state requires preference. This absence of awareness-driven regulation allows deeper rhythms to assert themselves. Internal timing synchronizes across systems, guided by processes that favor consistency over variation. Repair and refinement continue quietly, completing cycles that do not need to be finished quickly. The body does not hurry toward resolution. It allows balance to sustain itself through gentle repetition, maintaining continuity without interruption. In this condition, rest no longer feels like a state entered or maintained. It becomes the background against which nothing stands out. There is no effort to remain here and no concern about leaving. The body continues exactly as it is meant to, stable and self-sustaining, while awareness softens into the absence of demand. Continuity holds on its own, unbroken and unobserved, allowing rest to remain complete without attention. As the body remains at rest, the need for transition itself begins to disappear. There is no longer a sense of moving from one state to another, no subtle crossing point where effort ends and ease begins. Instead, rest reveals itself as a continuous condition, one that does not require entry or maintenance. The body no longer prepares for change, nor does it anticipate the next adjustment. Systems remain aligned because alignment is already present, sustained quietly without direction, intention, or timing that needs to be followed. In this state, internal processes lose their sense of sequence. Rather than unfolding in steps that need to be completed, they exist simultaneously, supporting one another through gentle consistency. Breathing continues without rhythm being noticed. Circulation moves without preference or emphasis. Muscular tone holds only what structure requires, releasing everything else without instruction. Nothing feels delayed, and nothing feels rushed. The body does not move toward balance. It remains within it, uninterrupted. The nervous system reflects this absence of transition through stability rather than stillness. Signals remain present, but they do not rise or fall in response to change. There is no scanning, no adjustment, no recalibration required. Sensory information arrives softened, processed without interpretation, and released without memory. Internal communication maintains its course without urgency, allowing the body to remain safe without preparing for action. Awareness, in turn, becomes increasingly neutral. It no longer shifts between focus and distraction, between attention and absence. It simply remains, without position and without function. Thoughts may appear as distant impressions, lacking the structure to hold interest. Sensations blend into a continuous background, indistinguishable from the space that contains them. Time loses its forward movement, becoming an open field rather than a path to follow. As this neutrality settles, the distinction between rest and activity dissolves further. The body continues to function, but without the sensation of doing. Processes complete themselves without beginning. Regulation persists without correction. There is nothing to arrive at and nothing to sustain. The system rests because it is free from interference, not because it has reached a particular depth or stage. In this uninterrupted state, rest no longer feels like an experience. It feels like absence of demand. Nothing asks to be held together. Nothing asks to be released. The body remains exactly as it needs to be, supported by rhythms that have always known how to continue without guidance. Awareness can fade completely or remain faintly present, and neither alters what is already stable. Rest holds itself, quietly and continuously, without transition. As rest settles fully, there is no sense of completion or arrival, only the steady continuation of what has already been stable for some time. The body does not mark this moment as different from the one before it, because nothing new needs to be managed. Processes that once adjusted now maintain themselves without reference to change. There is no internal signal announcing that rest has deepened. There is simply an absence of demand. Continuity becomes the defining quality, a smooth, unbroken flow where nothing interrupts and nothing accelerates, allowing the body to remain exactly where it is without effort or intention. Within this continuity, activity becomes indistinguishable from stillness. Circulation continues, breathing continues, cellular exchange continues, yet none of these movements stand out as actions. They exist as background rhythms, evenly distributed and unremarkable, supporting the body without calling attention to themselves. Muscular tone remains balanced, holding structure where necessary and releasing everywhere else, not as a conscious act, but as a natural consequence of stability. The body does not relax further because it does not need to. It simply remains relaxed because nothing disrupts it. The nervous system sustains this state through consistency rather than control. Signals move without urgency, maintaining coordination without creating contrast. There is no readiness held in reserve and no vigilance maintained against potential change. Sensory input arrives softened and diffuse, processed without interpretation, and released without residue. Internal communication remains steady, allowing systems to support one another quietly, without escalation or correction. Safety is preserved not through alertness, but through the reliability of patterns that no longer need adjustment. Awareness, if present at all, feels untethered from function. It does not guide, observe, or evaluate. It drifts without direction, sometimes faint, sometimes absent, never required. Thoughts do not organize themselves into sequences, and sensations do not separate into distinct events. Experience becomes a single, continuous field where nothing stands apart enough to demand attention. Time loses definition, no longer perceived as passing or pausing, simply existing as an open, unmarked expanse. At deeper levels, restoration continues quietly, not as a task to complete, but as an ongoing condition. Repair processes refine themselves gently, chemical balance remains stable, and internal timing stays synchronized without effort. These processes do not accelerate or slow in response to awareness. They proceed according to rhythms that have always operated independently. The body does not seek improvement or resolution. It maintains itself through repetition, allowing stability to persist without interruption. In this state, rest no longer feels like something being experienced. It becomes the absence of need, the quiet condition that remains when nothing requires change. There is nothing to hold, nothing to release, nothing to anticipate. The body continues in calm continuity, supported by systems that do not depend on attention to function. Awareness may fade completely or linger faintly, and neither alters what is already stable. Rest holds itself, unbroken and effortless, allowing everything to remain exactly as it is. As rest continues without interruption, awareness begins to change in a way that is difficult to describe because it does not announce itself. There is no clear moment when deliberate awareness stops, no boundary that marks where attention ends and absence begins. Instead, awareness gradually loosens its structure, releasing the need to orient itself around thoughts, sensations, or time. The mind does not switch off, it simply stops positioning itself as the center of experience. What remains is a soft presence that no longer seeks reference points or meaning. In this state, attention no longer gathers itself around specific objects. It does not follow thoughts as they appear, nor does it attempt to hold sensations in place. Ideas may surface briefly, half-formed and unconnected, dissolving before they can establish direction. Sensations blend into the background, losing their edges and their demand for interpretation. Awareness drifts not because it is pulled away, but because there is nothing left for it to hold on to. Deliberate focus becomes unnecessary, and without resistance, it fades. The body continues without acknowledging this shift. Breathing remains steady and unremarkable. Circulation flows evenly, maintaining balance without emphasis. Muscular tone stays aligned, neither tightening nor releasing further, simply remaining stable. The nervous system does not register the fading of awareness as loss. Regulation proceeds as it always has, guided by internal signals that do not require observation. The body does not depend on awareness to remain organized, and this independence allows awareness to soften fully. As deliberate awareness dissolves, time loses its structure. There is no sense of before or after, no anticipation of what might come next. Moments do not connect into sequences. They exist as a continuous field without direction. The mind does not measure duration or track progression because there is no task that requires it. This absence of temporal structure supports deeper rest, allowing experience to unfold without the pressure of movement or change. At this depth, effort is no longer identifiable. There is no sense of doing or allowing, holding or releasing. Processes continue because they are already in motion, not because they are sustained by attention. Regulation remains intact without supervision. Balance holds without confirmation. The body rests within itself, supported by rhythms that have always known how to continue without guidance. In this quiet fading, awareness becomes optional. It may remain faintly present or disappear entirely, and neither state alters what is happening. The body continues in calm continuity, stable and self-sustaining. There is nothing left to manage, nothing left to resolve. Deliberate awareness steps aside naturally, and rest deepens without effort, uninterrupted and complete. As deliberate awareness continues to soften, it no longer tries to remain present. There is no effort to follow thoughts or hold sensations in place. Attention loosens on its own, drifting without direction because nothing asks it to stay. Awareness does not disappear suddenly, it thins gently, like sound fading into distance. The body remains unchanged by this shift. Breathing continues steadily, circulation stays even, muscular tone holds without tension, regulation proceeds without pause, guided by systems that do not depend on observation. The body does not notice when awareness fades, because awareness was never required for balance to remain intact. Time also loses definition. Moments do not link into sequences, and there is no sense of movement forward or backward. Experience feels continuous rather than ordered, open rather than structured. Nothing needs to be remembered or anticipated. The absence of direction allows rest to deepen naturally. In this state, awareness becomes optional. It may remain faint or slip away entirely, and neither changes what is happening. The body continues quietly, stable and self-sustaining, while rest holds itself without effort or attention. As the body remains in quiet continuity, awareness no longer feels the need to remain organized around experience. There is no deliberate withdrawal, no decision to let go. Instead, attention gradually loses its grip on structure, releasing the habit of following thoughts, tracking sensations, or locating itself in time. Awareness becomes less defined, less centered, as if it no longer needs to stand anywhere in particular. Thoughts may still arise, but they do so without pulling attention toward them. They pass through softly, incomplete, and unbound, leaving no trace behind. This release does not feel like loss. It feels like relief. The mind is no longer responsible for maintaining coherence, and without that responsibility, effort dissolves. Sensations are no longer singled out for interpretation. Sounds blend into the background without being identified. Internal signals are received without being measured or evaluated. Awareness remains present, but it no longer positions itself as an observer. It exists as a diffuse field, open and unoccupied. The body continues without acknowledging this change. Breathing unfolds at its own pace, unconcerned with depth or rhythm. Circulation remains even, supporting tissues quietly and consistently. Muscular tone holds structure without tightening, releasing everything else gradually as the body recognizes that nothing needs to be prepared for. The nervous system does not require awareness to guide regulation. Signals continue to move through established pathways, maintaining balance without supervision or correction. As awareness loosens further, time begins to lose its familiar form. Moments no longer arrange themselves into a sequence that needs to be followed. There is no sense of moving forward, no reference point marking what has passed or what might come next. Experience feels continuous rather than ordered, unfolding without direction or expectation. The absence of temporal structure allows rest to deepen without interruption, as nothing urges the mind to remain oriented. At this depth, awareness no longer holds the body together. It does not monitor, adjust, or confirm stability. Processes continue because they are already complete in their intention. Regulation remains intact, sustained by rhythms that have never depended on attention. The body rests within itself, stable and self-sufficient, allowing awareness to soften without consequence. In this state, awareness becomes optional rather than necessary. It may remain faintly present, drifting without focus, or it may fade entirely, and neither alters what is happening. The body continues quietly, supported by systems that know how to maintain balance without guidance. Rest holds itself steady, uninterrupted by thought or effort, allowing awareness to dissolve naturally into the background of a state that no longer requires it. As rest deepens further, the mind begins to release its final attachment to understanding. There is no longer a need to know what is happening, how deep the state is, or whether anything is progressing. Questions do not arise because the space that once held them has softened. Awareness no longer checks itself, no longer looks back to confirm where it is or how it arrived. The need for orientation fades, replaced by a quiet acceptance that nothing requires explanation. In this state, thoughts lose their narrative quality. They do not form stories or sequences, and they do not point toward meaning. Instead, they appear as brief impressions, incomplete and weightless, dissolving before they can gather structure. The mind no longer attempts to connect them or draw conclusions from them. Knowing becomes unnecessary, not because it is resisted, but because there is nothing left that needs to be known. The body remains entirely unaffected by this release. Its rhythms continue without alteration, steady and self-sustaining. Breathing moves gently, unconcerned with pace or depth. Circulation maintains balance without emphasis. Muscles remain supported without holding, aligned without effort. The nervous system does not require interpretation to function. Regulation proceeds smoothly, guided by internal signals that have always operated independently of awareness. As the need to know dissolves, the sense of self begins to soften as well. There is less distinction between observer and experience, less separation between sensation and space. Awareness no longer feels contained within the body or positioned behind thought. It spreads, diffuses, or fades without choosing a direction. This change is not dramatic. It unfolds quietly as the mind releases roles it no longer needs to play. Time, too, becomes irrelevant. There is no tracking of duration, no anticipation of what comes next. Experience exists without reference, unmeasured and uninterrupted. The absence of time does not feel empty. It feels neutral, calm, and complete. Nothing moves forward because there is nowhere to go. Nothing ends because nothing needs to conclude. In this quiet simplicity, rest becomes absolute without becoming noticeable. The body continues exactly as it should, stable and complete. Awareness no longer supervises or participates. It simply loosens and recedes, leaving behind a state that holds itself effortlessly. Nothing is missing. Nothing is required. The system remains settled, sustained by balance that no longer depends on knowing, attention, or thought. As this state continues, awareness no longer feels like something that belongs to the body or even something that belongs anywhere at all. It does not withdraw suddenly, and it does not disappear in a way that can be noticed. Instead, it becomes increasingly diffuse, losing its boundaries, its edges, and its sense of position. There is no longer a clear sense of being aware of something. Awareness no longer points outward or inward. It simply exists as a faint presence that no longer tries to locate itself within experience. Thoughts no longer feel like events happening in a mind. Sensations no longer feel like signals coming from a body. Everything softens into a single, continuous field where nothing stands apart long enough to be identified. In this field, effort has completely lost its reference point. There is no sense of holding on, no sense of letting go, because there is nothing left to grip and nothing left to release. The body no longer feels managed or maintained. It feels complete in its own motion, as if every system has settled into the simplest possible expression of itself. Breathing continues without rhythm being noticed, sometimes shallow, sometimes deep, without pattern or intention. Circulation flows steadily, unconcerned with direction or speed. Muscles remain supported without tension, aligned without adjustment, existing in a state where nothing asks more of them than what is already present. The nervous system reflects this depth through an almost featureless calm. Signals continue to move, but they no longer create contrast. There is no rise or fall, no alertness, no readiness waiting beneath the surface. Sensory input arrives softened beyond recognition, passing through without being processed into meaning. Internal communication remains steady and unbroken, not because it is actively regulated, but because nothing interferes with its natural rhythm. Safety is no longer maintained through awareness or vigilance. It is maintained through stability itself. As awareness thins further, the sense of self becomes increasingly indistinct. There is no longer a clear center from which experience is observed. There is no inside or outside, no observer and observed. Experience unfolds without perspective, without ownership, without reference. Thoughts may still arise, but they do not belong to anyone. Sensations may still exist, but they are not localized or interpreted. The body does not feel present or absent. It simply is, held together by processes that do not require identification. Time dissolves almost completely in this state. There is no awareness of duration passing, no sense of sequence, no movement from one moment to the next. Experience does not feel frozen, but it also does not feel like it is progressing. It exists as an open, uninterrupted continuity where nothing begins and nothing ends. Without time to organize experience, the mind no longer attempts to follow or predict. The need to orient dissolves entirely, allowing rest to deepen without resistance. In this depth, nothing more is required. There is no next step, no deeper state to reach, no condition to maintain. The body continues quietly, perfectly capable of sustaining itself without attention. Awareness, now barely present or absent altogether, no longer participates in regulation or observation. Rest is no longer something that happens. It is what remains when everything unnecessary has fallen away. The system stays settled, whole, and uninterrupted, allowing sleep to arrive not as an event, but as a continuation of this quiet, effortless state. As this state continues, there is no clear sense of entering anything new, and yet something quietly deepens. It does not feel like movement or progress, because there is no direction left to move in. Instead, experience settles into a depth that feels already complete, as if the body and whatever remains of awareness have arrived somewhere familiar without traveling there. Nothing announces this depth. There is no signal to mark it. It is simply the absence of anything asking to change, adjust, or be understood. In this depth, the body no longer presents itself as an object to be felt. Sensations do not disappear, but they lose their edges, blending into a single, continuous background that does not invite attention. Breathing continues, but it feels distant, as though it belongs to the space around the body rather than to the body itself. The heart maintains its rhythm without emphasis, circulation flows without direction, and muscular tone holds only the minimum structure required to exist, releasing everything else without decision or effort. The body is not being relaxed, it is simply no longer being held. The nervous system reflects this state through a profound neutrality. Signals still pass through, but they no longer rise into contrast or urgency. There is no scanning, no readiness, no anticipation waiting beneath the surface. Internal communication remains smooth and uninterrupted, not because it is actively maintained, but because nothing interferes with it. Safety is no longer something that needs to be confirmed. It is implicit, embedded in the consistency of systems that have settled into their most economical expression. Awareness, if it can still be called that, no longer occupies a position. It does not observe from anywhere, and it does not belong to anyone. There is no sense of watching, noticing, or drifting. Experience unfolds without a center, without perspective, without reference. Thoughts may still arise faintly, but they have no weight, no momentum, no place to land. Sensations may still exist, but they are not localized or interpreted. Everything feels evenly distributed, as if nothing stands closer or farther away. Time has almost entirely dissolved at this depth. There is no sense of duration passing, no awareness of moments accumulating. Experience does not feel frozen, but it also does not feel like it is moving forward. It exists as an uninterrupted continuity, a quiet field where nothing begins and nothing ends. Without time to organize experience, the mind no longer attempts to follow or predict. The idea of next loses all meaning. In this condition, there is nothing left to do and nothing left to allow. Effort has no place to attach itself, and intention has no function to perform. The body continues exactly as it needs to, self-sustaining and complete. Awareness no longer participates, supervises, or interferes. What remains is not a state to maintain, but a quiet stability that holds itself effortlessly. Sleep does not arrive as a transition or an event. It arrives as a continuation of this depth, where nothing is required, nothing is missing, and everything that remains is already at rest. As this depth holds, there is no longer a sense of remaining somewhere by choice. Staying does not feel like an action, and leaving does not feel like a possibility. Experience has settled into a quiet continuity where change is no longer expected or resisted. Nothing needs to stabilize because nothing is moving out of balance. The body does not check itself, and awareness does not verify what is happening. There is simply a steady condition in which everything that needs to function continues to do so without interruption, without effort, and without reference to any goal. Within this continuity, the body feels less like a form and more like a condition. Boundaries soften further, not because they are dissolving, but because they no longer matter. Breathing continues without being noticed as breath. Circulation maintains its rhythm without being experienced as movement. Muscular structure remains present without tension or release, as if the body has found a position that requires nothing more from it. There is no sensation of settling deeper, because there is no deeper to reach. What exists now feels sufficient and complete. The nervous system reflects this state through a complete absence of urgency. Signals continue to move, but they do not fluctuate or call attention to themselves. There is no background readiness, no subtle preparation for what might come next. Internal communication flows evenly, maintaining coordination without escalation. Safety no longer feels like a condition to be achieved or protected. It feels inherent, woven into the consistency of systems that are no longer responding to anything at all. Awareness, if present, has lost its sense of location entirely. There is no feeling of being inside the body or observing from a distance. Experience unfolds without a center, without a point of reference from which it could be measured or understood. Thoughts may appear faintly, but they do not organize into meaning or narrative. Sensations may arise, but they do not stand out as separate events. Everything exists on the same level, evenly distributed, without emphasis or hierarchy. Time has no influence in this state. There is no sense of duration passing, no recognition of sequence, no anticipation of change. Experience does not pause, but it also does not progress. It remains open and continuous, like a single moment that does not move forward because it does not need to. Without time to structure experience, the mind has nothing to follow and nothing to return to. In this quiet stability, nothing needs to be maintained. There is no effort to remain, no concern about drifting, no intention guiding experience in any direction. The body continues in perfect adequacy, self-regulating and complete. Awareness no longer participates in keeping things together. What remains is a steady, effortless continuity where rest is no longer something that happens, but the condition in which everything quietly remains exactly as it is. As this state continues, there is no longer any sense that experience needs to be supported from within. Nothing feels held up by attention, and nothing feels at risk of falling away. The depth that has settled now carries its own weight, steady and unchanging, without needing to be reinforced. There is no impulse to check whether it is still there, because there is nothing outside of it to compare against. Experience no longer contrasts itself with anything else. It simply remains, whole and uninterrupted, without asking to be noticed. Within this depth, the body feels neither present nor absent. It no longer appears as something that occupies space or performs actions. Processes continue, but they do so without creating sensation or emphasis. Breathing is not experienced as movement. Circulation is not experienced as flow. Muscular structure exists without tension and without release, as if the body has found a configuration that requires no further adjustment. There is no feeling of sinking or floating. There is only a quiet adequacy where nothing needs to change to feel complete. The nervous system reflects this condition through an almost imperceptible steadiness. Signals do not rise, fall, or fluctuate. There is no modulation toward alertness or rest because both have lost their meaning. Communication continues without contrast, maintaining organization without effort. Safety is no longer registered as a feeling or a confirmation. It is simply implied by the absence of disturbance. The system does not protect itself. It no longer needs to. Awareness, if it can still be described at all, has released its final orientation. It does not observe, drift, or fade. It does not feel spread out or centered. It exists without shape, without direction, without function. Thoughts no longer arrive as events. They do not form or dissolve. They simply fail to gather. Sensations no longer separate themselves from the space around them. Everything that remains feels evenly distributed, as if experience has become a single, undivided field. Time has no presence here. There is no sense of duration passing, no sense of stillness within motion, or motion within stillness. Experience does not feel paused, and it does not feel continuous in the usual way. It simply exists without reference to before or after. Without time to frame it, nothing feels temporary or permanent. The idea of transition disappears completely, leaving only a stable condition that does not move. In this state, there is nothing left to surrender and nothing left to accept. The depth does not need permission to remain. It does not require attention, intention, or understanding. The body continues exactly as it must, self-sustaining and complete. Awareness no longer accompanies experience. What remains holds itself effortlessly, without effort and without interruption, allowing rest to persist as a quiet, unchanging continuity where nothing is missing and nothing is required. As this depth continues, there is no longer a sense of returning to anything, because nothing has been left behind. Experience does not feel like it has moved away from ordinary awareness or arrived somewhere separate. Instead, everything that once felt distinct has softened into a single, stable condition where movement and stillness no longer contrast with one another. There is no expectation of change, no anticipation of waking, no sense that this state must be held or preserved. It remains simply because nothing interrupts it. Within this quiet continuity, the body no longer presents itself as a collection of sensations or processes. It does not feel heavy or light, present or absent. Breathing continues, but it is not experienced as breath. Circulation continues, but it is not experienced as movement. Muscular structure remains without tension and without release, as if the body has settled into a form that requires no further adjustment. There is no sense of posture, no sense of position, only a neutral adequacy where the body exists without asking anything of awareness. The nervous system reflects this depth through a complete absence of contrast. Signals do not rise into alertness or fall into rest. They remain even, unremarkable, and continuous. There is no background readiness, no subtle holding pattern beneath the surface. Internal communication sustains itself without modulation, allowing coordination to persist without any sense of effort. Safety is no longer felt or confirmed. It is simply assumed, embedded in the consistency of a system that no longer responds to change. Awareness, if it still exists at all, no longer has a role to perform. It does not observe, interpret, or drift. It does not fade in a way that can be noticed. It simply ceases to define experience. There is no center from which experience is perceived, no edge where it ends. Thoughts do not arise as fragments or impressions. Sensations do not separate themselves from the space around them. Everything that remains feels evenly distributed, as though experience has flattened into a single, uninterrupted field. Time has fully released its influence here. There is no sense of duration passing, no recognition of stillness within motion or motion within stillness. Experience does not pause, but it also does not continue in a way that implies sequence. It exists without reference, without memory, without anticipation. The absence of time does not feel empty or disorienting. It feels complete, as though nothing needs to be measured for anything to remain intact. In this state, Rest no longer deepens because depth has lost its meaning. There is no further settling, no additional release, no final threshold to cross. What remains is a quiet completeness, sustained without attention and without effort. The body continues exactly as it must, stable and self-sufficient. Awareness no longer participates, supervises, or accompanies experience. Everything holds itself effortlessly, allowing rest to persist as an unbroken condition where nothing returns, nothing departs, and nothing is required. As this depth continues, experience no longer organizes itself into parts that need to be understood or related to one another. There is no longer a sense of inner and outer, no subtle division between what is felt and what is happening. Everything that remains unfolds within the same quiet field where sensation, space, and awareness are no longer distinguishable as separate elements. Nothing stands forward enough to be identified, and nothing recedes enough to disappear. Experience does not gather itself into moments or impressions. It simply exists as a continuous presence that does not ask to be interpreted, measured, or followed. Within this continuity, the body no longer appears as a structure or a form. It does not feel located in space, nor does it feel separate from the space around it. Breathing continues without being recognized as breath, blending into the same field as everything else. Circulation maintains itself without direction or emphasis, no longer experienced as movement or flow. Muscular structure exists without tension or release, not because the body is relaxed, but because there is no longer a reference point from which effort or holding could be recognized. The body remains complete without presenting itself as something that needs to be sensed. The nervous system reflects this state through an extraordinary uniformity. Signals continue to move, but they do not create contrast or demand response. There is no background readiness, no subtle alertness waiting beneath the surface. Communication remains steady, even, and unbroken, not because it is being regulated, but because nothing disrupts it. Safety is no longer felt as a condition or confirmed through sensation. It is implicit, embedded in the absence of disturbance and the consistency of internal rhythm. Awareness, if it can still be named, no longer occupies a position within experience. It does not observe from anywhere, and it does not drift away from anything. It exists without direction, without center, without boundary. Thoughts do not arise as events, fragments, or impressions. They fail to form entirely. Sensations do not appear and disappear. They remain indistinguishable from the space in which they occur. Everything that remains feels evenly distributed, as though experience has flattened into a single, continuous plane without depth or hierarchy. Time has completely released its influence in this state. There is no sense of duration passing, no awareness of sequence, no feeling of stillness contrasted with movement. Experience does not pause, and it does not continue forward. It simply remains, unmeasured and uninterrupted, without time to structure it. Nothing feels temporary or permanent. The idea of before and after dissolves entirely, leaving only a quiet continuity that does not progress because there is nowhere to progress to. In this condition, nothing remains to be released, and nothing remains to be held. Effort has no surface to attach to, and intention has no function to perform. The body continues exactly as it must, self-sustaining and complete. Awareness no longer participates in maintaining coherence or meaning. What remains holds itself effortlessly, without interruption and without need, allowing rest to persist as an unbroken, undifferentiated state where nothing separates, nothing resolves, and nothing is required. As this state continues, there is no longer a sense of remaining within it through intention or choice, because the idea of being inside something has dissolved completely. Experience no longer frames itself as a place entered or a depth reached. It simply persists as an unbroken field where nothing distinguishes itself enough to create orientation. There is no subtle effort to stay, no background thought wondering whether anything has shifted. The condition holds because nothing interrupts it, and this uninterrupted continuity removes the need for confirmation, attention, or even presence as it was once understood. Within this unbroken field, the body no longer feels like an object participating in experience. It does not register as weight, form, or position. Breathing continues, yet it does not feel like breathing is happening anywhere in particular. Circulation maintains itself without being perceived as movement. Muscular structure remains without tension, without slack, without adjustment, as if the idea of holding or releasing has lost all relevance. The body does not relax further, nor does it require rest. It exists as a stable condition, complete in its own quiet functioning. The nervous system reflects this depth through a consistency so even that it no longer produces contrast. Signals continue to travel, but they do not rise into alertness or fall into rest. There is no modulation, no fluctuation, no readiness waiting beneath the surface. Internal communication sustains itself without direction, not because it is actively balanced, but because there is nothing left to destabilize it. Safety is no longer something that can be sensed or confirmed. It is simply implied by the absence of disruption, by the steady sameness of internal rhythm that no longer responds to change. Awareness, if it still exists at all, no longer presents itself as something separate from experience. It does not observe, drift, or fade in a way that can be noticed. It no longer frames sensations, thoughts, or space. Thoughts do not form as impressions or fragments. They do not gather enough structure to be recognized. Sensations do not arise and pass. They remain indistinguishable from the field that contains them. Everything that remains feels evenly distributed, as though experience has lost its depth and become a single, continuous surface without foreground or background. Time has no role here. There is no sense of duration unfolding, no recognition of moments accumulating, no awareness of stillness contrasted with motion. Experience does not feel paused, but it also does not feel like it is moving forward. It exists without reference, without sequence, without memory or anticipation. Without time to organize experience, there is nothing to follow and nothing to return to. The idea of progression dissolves entirely, leaving only a continuity that does not change because change has lost its meaning. In this condition, rest is no longer something that deepens or completes. Depth itself has disappeared as a concept. There is no further settling, no additional release, no final threshold to cross. What remains is a quiet completeness, sustained without effort and without awareness. The body continues exactly as it must, self-sufficient and whole. Awareness no longer participates or accompanies experience. Everything holds itself effortlessly, allowing this unbroken field to persist without interruption, without direction, and without need. As this unbroken field persists, there is no longer any sense that experience needs to be sustained by anything within it. Nothing feels as though it must remain aligned, because alignment is no longer something that can be lost. The condition that remains does not fluctuate or drift. It holds itself with a quiet certainty that does not require reinforcement. There is no inner movement checking whether stability is still present, and no outer reference against which it could be measured. Experience does not compare itself to anything else. It simply remains, whole and uninterrupted, without contrast or variation. Within this continuum, the body no longer appears as a participant or a container. It does not feel present in space, nor does it feel absent from it. Breathing continues without location, unfolding without sensation of depth or rhythm. Circulation sustains itself without being experienced as motion or flow. Muscular structure exists without effort, without slack, without any need for adjustment, as if the very idea of posture or position has dissolved. The body is not resting in the usual sense. It is existing in a condition where rest and activity are no longer distinguishable. The nervous system reflects this depth through an almost complete neutrality. Signals move without creating peaks or valleys, without rising into alertness or settling into relaxation. There is no readiness, no background tension, no latent response waiting beneath the surface. Communication continues evenly, uninterrupted and unremarkable, not because it is being regulated, but because there is nothing left to regulate. Safety is no longer perceived or confirmed. It is implicit, embedded in the consistency of a system that has ceased to respond to change. Awareness, if it can still be named, no longer frames experience in any way. It does not observe from a point of view, and it does not dissolve in a way that can be noticed. It exists without position, without boundary, without function. Thoughts do not appear as impressions or fragments. They fail to take shape entirely. Sensations do not separate themselves from the space around them. They do not arise or fade. Everything that remains feels evenly distributed, as if experience has become a single, seamless expanse without depth, edge, or center. Time has fully lost its influence in this state. There is no sense of duration unfolding, no awareness of moments accumulating or passing. Experience does not feel still within movement, nor does it feel in motion within stillness. It exists without reference to before or after, without anticipation, without memory, without time to structure it. Nothing feels temporary or enduring. The idea of change dissolves completely, leaving only a continuous presence that does not progress because there is nowhere for it to go. In this undivided condition, nothing remains to be released and nothing remains to be held. Effort has no surface on which it could rest, and intention has no direction in which it could move. The body continues exactly as it must, self-sustaining and complete, without supervision or awareness. What remains holds itself effortlessly, uninterrupted and whole, allowing rest to persist as an absolute continuity where nothing separates, nothing resolves, and nothing is required. As this condition continues, there is no longer any sense that experience needs to be supported, understood, or even noticed in order to remain intact. Nothing feels as though it could drift away or collapse if attention were removed, because attention no longer occupies a position from which it could intervene. Experience does not hold itself together through coherence or meaning. It holds itself through absence of disturbance. What remains is not fragile, not suspended, not maintained by effort. It exists with a quiet certainty, as if the idea of interruption has lost all relevance. Within this state, the body no longer appears as something that is resting or doing nothing. It is simply present without representation. Breathing continues without being experienced as breath, unfolding without depth, without rhythm, without location. Circulation sustains itself without being perceived as movement. Muscular structure exists without effort and without release. Not because the body is relaxed, but because the notion of holding has disappeared entirely. There is no sense of posture, no awareness of position, no distinction between heaviness and lightness. The body does not feel settled into rest. It feels complete without requiring any further settling. The nervous system reflects this depth through a seamless steadiness that does not vary or modulate. Signals move without contrast, without escalation, without decline. There is no alertness beneath the surface, no readiness waiting to be activated. Communication remains uninterrupted, not because it is carefully balanced, but because there is nothing left that could disrupt it. Safety is no longer felt, checked, or confirmed. It is simply assumed, woven into the consistency of a system that no longer responds to change. Awareness, if it can still be described at all, no longer frames or accompanies experience. It does not observe, drift, expand, or fade in any way that can be noticed. It does not belong to a center, and it does not extend toward an edge. Thoughts do not arise as fragments or impressions. They do not gather enough structure to appear. Sensations do not come and go. They remain indistinguishable from the space in which they occur. Everything that remains feels evenly distributed, without hierarchy, without foreground or background, without anything standing apart. Time has no presence in this condition. There is no sense of duration unfolding, no awareness of sequence, no feeling of stillness contrasted with motion. Experience does not feel paused, and it does not feel continuous in the way continuity is usually understood. It simply is, without reference, without direction, without memory or anticipation, without time to organize it. Nothing feels temporary or permanent. The idea of change loses all meaning, leaving only a stable condition that does not progress because it does not need to. In this depth, rest no longer deepens and stillness no longer settles. Those ideas belong to movement and comparison, both of which have fallen away. What remains is a quiet completeness, sustained without effort, without awareness, without intention. The body continues exactly as it must, self-sufficient and whole. Awareness no longer participates or withdraws. It is simply absent as a function. Everything holds itself effortlessly, allowing this condition to persist as an uninterrupted state where nothing returns, nothing departs, and nothing is required.